I'm Mark, and this is the Mr. Productivity Podcast, the podcast to help solopreneurs banish overwhelm, reduce stress, and get more done. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking with Art Gelwicks, owner of GelwicksTech Digital Transformation Services and host of the Being Productive, CrossPlatform, and ProductivityCast podcast. Now, before we dive into today's show, I want to invite you to sign up for my free 21-day productivity challenge. As a solopreneur, you've got a lot to do, and this challenge will help you be more productive at it. Just invest 1 minute a day in reading a tip that will transform your productivity habits in less than 1 month. To get the free 21-day productivity challenge, head on over to my website, MrProductivity.com. Remember, Mr. is all spelled out, M-I-S-T-E-R, MrProductivity.com. Now, on with the show. Art, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate you having me on.
You know, I am excited to talk to you because you are in the productivity space. You have a couple of productivity podcasts, which we'll talk about later in the show. And I love talking shop with other experts like myself. And what I want to start off with on the show is it shouldn't be, but it's a very sensitive, hot debate. It's on to-do list. So I have a very unique opinion. I have no idea, audience, what Art's opinion is until he's going to tell me what it is. So I believe to-do lists are a valid productivity tool, but I think two things should go on your to-do list. It should be used as a temporary storage. In other words, if you can't put a task or project directly on your calendar, it should go on your to-do list, which you should look at sooner rather than later. And the other thing I think should go on your to-do list is maybe those recurring events. If you have to pay a bill at a certain time of the month and you can't pay it early, or maybe this thing's going to take you 5 or 10 minutes. I have seen so many clients with to-do lists, and it's like the Dead Sea. They just add and add and add and add, and nothing comes off it. And I'm like, okay, that's not what the point of a to-do list is. So what is Art's opinion of a to-do list?
I'm glad you're bringing it up that way, because when I think about to-do lists, and this is from dealing with project management for solopreneurs, for corporations, any size, you're absolutely right. To-do lists get mishandled so often. I normally will tell people, think about your to-do list like your refrigerator. Let me explain that. When you go down and you open your refrigerator door and you look around inside there, I guarantee there's a bunch of stuff in there that's been in there longer than it should have been. There's a bunch of stuff in there that you're probably looking at going, when did that even go in there? And then there's stuff that gets done and then has to be purchased again and put back in the refrigerator over and over. And if you think about your tasks on a to-do list in a similar mindset, you start to give yourself permission to do things like every so often clean them out. Go through and find the ones that, you got that giant jar of capers from BJ's or Costco that you used for your bagel one time, and it's now sitting in the back corner of the refrigerator, never to be moved again. I guarantee you've got some tasks that are just like that. Mm-hmm. So when I talk with people about setting up tasks and task lists and all, it's usually dependent on the tools that they've settled on to help them manage their to-do lists. But I recommend that if they can find a tool that either provides the function up front or gives you the ability to add the function to allow you to assign not only due dates, but also expiration dates to your tasks, that right there is a huge step in the right direction.
I love what you just said about the expiration date and I love your analogy of the fridge, because this stuff is going to spoil. Now, before we move on to the tools, because you wanted to talk about tools, and I think that's a good segue. If you have a task that I'm asking Art specifically here, you have a task and this is going to take you 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. Do you go right to your calendar and find a spot for it and plug it right into your calendar, or do you put it on the to-do list?
I'm not a time blocker by definition. I know a lot of people are heavily into that, and that's one of the big pushes in the productivity space right now is doing time blocking. I don't do that specifically because of the type of work I do. I like to be able to take a task, define the estimated duration for it. That's the old project manager in me. And then be able to have those kind of blocked together to say, okay, I've got 15 minutes now. What do I have that's a 15-minute task that I can do and knock out?
Okay.
It's easy to go through and do the assignments, but if I assign tasks to specific blocks in the calendar, those blocks will probably be very large. Like I'll designate maybe 2 hours on a given day that I'm going to do website updates, for example. But I'm not going to assign individual website update tasks to my calendar. That's just a level of minutia that isn't giving me a return that I need. Having the larger accumulation of those tasks, though, being able to say, okay, website updates, look at my tasks that I've categorized, know what are the impact tasks, and then execute on those, that's more effective. Now, realistically, and again, a lot of people work in and do interrupt-driven professions. You never know when something is going to come in and derail your plan. So being able to spin down something and spin up something else very quickly, that flexibility, at least to me, is far more important than having that overall calendar-based structure. But I don't want to deter anybody from using the calendar-based structure. I know lots of people who thrive off of a time blocking mechanism to be able to go in and keep a control over their day. It just doesn't match the way I work and I operate.
Well, what I do is kind of a hybrid. So I just read the book, The One Thing, which I recommend everyone read. I read it again. And now what I do is I actually block off like 2 or 3 hours a day. And the only thing it says is the one thing, because that one thing is going to change from day to day. But I want to block off 3 hours. It's not being on social media. It's not doing anything that doesn't move the needle. It's, okay, I'm serious about this one thing today, so I will block that off. But what I also do is sometimes I want to read an article, and I really can't get around to reading the article, but something magical happens when I take the link to the article and I say, well, I scroll through it real quickly. It's going to take me about maybe 20 minutes to read. It's a fairly long article. I will actually put that on my calendar. So when it comes up on my calendar, okay, well, it's on the schedule. So then I actually read it. Now, I don't do this for every article, but things I really want to do go on my calendar because I do operate under if it gets scheduled, it gets done. But it's fascinating to hear how you work your days off your to-do list and I work off mine on time blocking. And guess what? Both ways work.
Yeah, and that's really the important thing that people have to look at when they're dealing with task management is it's easy to fall into this mindset of saying there's only one way to do it. This is the best way, because we all know if you've been in this business long enough, you know that the best way changes depending on the prevailing winds. Mm-hmm. For a long time it was GTD. Now it's time blocking. Now next it'll be whatever it is. What you have to do is you have to find what works with your schedule. And for example, in mine, I do have a time block. I have a time block of an hour each morning that's designated as my planning time. And that's nothing is allowed to go into that planning time unless it's an extreme emergency or critical thing for a client. And that planning time gives me an opportunity to go in and say, okay, how do I balance my day? And maybe I'll go through and assign blocks. Maybe I'll designate a time block. I look and I say, okay, I've got a whole boatload of network configuration work that I have to do today. So I'm going to take 2 hours and lock it down. Again, I go back to the importance of understanding tasks at their individual level. Often we will get into this mindset of being overwhelmed by the massive number of tasks we have in there, and we look at them as a whole. Well, if I go back to the refrigerator analogy, the worst thing we do is when we go down to the refrigerator and we open the doors and say, what's there to eat? And you just stand there and you look at it and you look at it. And what we typically wind up doing is grabbing the least effort-driven piece of food in the refrigerator, a cheese stick in a wrapper. Well, that's great, but there's only so many cheese sticks that you can eat and use, and same way around tasks. There's only so many low-impact, easy completion tasks. So it's one of those things where I can't help but wonder, as you go through your task planning, are you giving yourself enough structure around the task to be able to make those decisions? For example, when I define a task, I define the front and the back end of the task too. What's it going to take to spin up to be effectively executing that task? And What does it take to spin that task down so I could restart it if I had to?
Interesting way of looking at it. And I caught something you said that you do your planning in the morning. I have elected to do it the night before. At the end of my day, before I actually disconnect myself from my work self, I sit down and I reflect on the day. Did I get everything done? Most times, no, because life happens. And then I look at the day ahead and I'm like, okay, what didn't get done today that I need to move tomorrow? And then I'll actually plan before I go into family time. But again, there's no right or wrong answer here. You get the most bang for your buck in the morning. I get it at the end of my day the night before. The point is you got to do it. You can't do it reactively.
No, you're absolutely right there. Taking active control of your tasks, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, and my opinion is, especially over the past few years, we've really recognized this. It's even more difficult than ever to draw a hard line between those two sets. I mean, this is still your life, whether it's personal or professional. You need to manage both equivalently. But going through and giving yourself time to grab the tasks effectively, plan them out, figure out what you need to be successful, know what the success criteria is for the completed task. Often we have things on our task list that we'll go through and execute, and ultimately we don't know if that was successful or not. We just know it was done and the box got ticked. So setting all those criteria up as part of our process and being comfortable with it. And this is what I think so many people miss out on, is giving yourself permission to only do a set amount in a day. We look at our task list and say, okay, I've got all that done. Now what I should be doing? No, stop. Just be able to say, for today, this is what I need to get done. That's all. You don't have to constantly feed that hustle, can't even talk this morning. The hustle culture mindset does not help quality delivery.
I agree with that 100%. And I'll tell you, the people who have a dozen tasks on their list and 11 of them take them 30 seconds or less and they get them all done, but that 12th one, that was the one they really should do. They go, hey, I got 11 to 12 done. But to your point, you didn't do the one thing you really should have done today. You did all these tiny things and you marked them off your to-do list, but you didn't move the needle.
This is hitting right on what I recommend people do, especially with fixed tools. Almost every fixed tool has some sort of a priority option. Todoist, which is one of the really popular ones out there, has 4 priorities in there. To my recommendation, the term priority is a misnomer because priority is often determined by external factors. I say exchange that mentally, since we can't really change it in the application, but exchange it mentally with the term impact. What is the amount of impact this task is going to have on my goals, my objectives, my milestones, where I want to be, and what I want to accomplish? If that task has a high impact, then there's your value. There's your determination. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's an immediacy thing. It's just something that really gets you to where you want to go ultimately. So when I think about things like recording this podcast, to me, this is a high impact task. This is something that moves a lot of markers down the road. Whereas, processing through my paperwork for the day is a low impact task, but it also has to be done. And it allows me to get a better sense. Do I have a task management system that's full of low impact things? My metrics may say that I'm knocking out 65, 70, 80 things in a day. That's great. But if it's like eating 80 pieces of popcorn, have I really accomplished anything?
Are you hungry today, Art?
You know what? I typically talk about food or cars. So that's kind of my thing. So.
Okay. Well, let's move over to tools because there are so many tools. One of my words I like to use a lot is plethora. I love that word plethora. You can find endless number of to-do lists or task lists or reminders lists, calendar apps, notes app. And I am kind of like, I always start with the native app. Like I'm an Apple guy. So I use iOS reminders. I use Google Calendar, but I use the iOS calendar app and whatnot. I believe if try the native app first. If that doesn't work, if it doesn't fit, then begin to branch out and see what else is out there. Do you agree with that?
Somebody who's just trying to get their hands wrapped around their task management, absolutely. Start simple. Go with Occam's razor. Simplest solution is the best one. Use the tools that you already have available to you, but understand that you will outgrow them. They are tools that have a clear ceiling on them. And in many cases, you can use those just for your basic stuff. The more important thing with that is to get comfortable with allowing a tool to assist you in managing your tasks. Now, this is typically in reference to someone who's coming from, paper task lists or maybe even a paper journal or something, moving into the digital space. In the digital space itself, using things like basic task lists that are included on your phone or, a regular checklist in some application, those again are still a step above the digital or the paper aspect, but they do give you that option to be able to go in and manage a larger volume. I get into the discussion with people, do you do something that is turnkey, pre-built, or do you build your own, buy or build, that mindset? And I don't recommend to somebody who's getting into digital task management, build their own right away. Because the most important thing in either case is you have to dedicate time to learn your tool. If you learn your tool, in many cases, you'll find there's a lot of features you're not using. There's capabilities that could make things easier on a daily basis. And you may also recognize that ceiling much, much earlier. It's a funny dichotomy that you'll see between two big audiences. You'll see like the Todoist people of the world who are using a dedicated task manager to run their tasks. And then you'll see the people who use a tool, say like a Notion, to build a task manager or to go get a template. In either case, the objective still has to be the same. You have to define how you're going to manage your tasks agnostic of the tool. And it's not because the tools aren't good. It's because tools will always do the one thing we have seen them do over the years, which is eventually they'll go away. At some point, the odds are very good that a tool will no longer be available to you. Well, that shouldn't upend your entire task management system. It should just give you the ability to say, oh, okay, I can't use that anymore. How do I move my task management system into this new tool? Well, then you just have to learn the tool. You don't have to redefine your system from the ground up. But if you're somebody who's just getting into it, yeah, take one of the predefined tools, use the basic structures in it, use the basic mechanisms, get comfortable, but also take notes. Identify where is it working for you? Where is it not working for you? Where do you feel comfortable with it? And where don't you? Then you can move on to bigger and better things later on if you want.
When you were talking about outgrowing a tool, the thought that came into my head is what Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary V always says. He says, y'all worried about the platform, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, whatever. He goes, I want to go where the attention is. I'm not concerned about the platform. And that's essentially what you're saying when it comes to these tools. Don't worry about the tool. Worry about if it's going to help you get to where you want to go. And I think a lot of people get into bright, shiny object. Oh, this new app is out there. Let me go try it out. Well, is the one you already have now, is it working for you? Just because there's a new tool that's got your favorite color in the icon, that's a silly reason to jump there. And I think a lot of people, instead of figuring out what the tool will do for them or if it'll serve them, they're looking for the newest, latest, and greatest, which may make you take a step backwards. I remember there's a lot of tools out there, to your point, that when you go get them, you're like, holy crap, I have to spend all this time learning how to use this tool. Now your productivity is going to take a hit. Now, in the long run, it may work out to your advantage. But if you're just jumping because something's new or you saw an ad on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, I think that's a silly reason to leave a tool that's already serving you. Do you agree? Are you one of the million? Join over 1 million people, which may be a slight hyperbole, and get productivity tips that will help you live a more productive life. Head on over to MrProductivity.com/insider.
Yes, definitely. Jumping from tool to tool is never a good plan. If you want to change tools, understand that at some point you're going to have to run them in parallel for a while, because you can't just stop what you're doing and start it in a new area. It's just not going to be effective. You're going to run them in parallel for a little while. You're going to actually have an increase of your work before you start to see a representative decrease in the improvements of the new tool that you have. But when you start to look at a tool itself, I think so many people will go and say, I expect this tool to be the equivalent of auto drive in a Tesla. I want it to do the hard work for me and get me to completed tasks. It's not going to do that. None of them do that. Their real objective is just to keep stuff from falling through the cracks. Often it's to collaborate with other people, but for the most part, it's to make sure that you just don't lose track of things. So by thinking about the tool as truly what it is, which is, for all intents and purposes, a big database. Well, a database doesn't do anything that you don't ask it to do, that you don't tell it what its criteria are. And if I go back to my car analogy, auto drive's great if you tell it where you want it to go. If, let's say, not auto drive, but GPS. Google Maps is not going to say, where do you want to go? And tell you the places to go. It's going to wait until you tell it, well, I want to go to a restaurant. Okay, here's a bunch of options. That's all it's really good at. Now, we may see that change with AI. I think that's an entirely different discussion. But at its basics, when we look at our tools, we have to have a reasonable expectation as to what that tool is going to do for us. And I think that's part of our evaluation criteria from the very beginning, is write down, what do I expect this tool to do? And see, are we even being reasonable about this? If we expect a tool to give us a 20% increase in the number of tasks we're completing, I have to question that and say, all right, so is it going to be completing 20% more of the tasks for you? Or have you had 20% of your tasks falling through the cracks? And this is often a conversation I get into the corporate space, and solopreneurs know, because task management tools don't do the work for you. You can put a big tool into place, but if you want an increase in productivity, recognize you're going to be doing more work. You may be doing more of the right work and less of the wrong, which is where we should all get to, but you still are going to have to execute. The tool itself doesn't do the execution for you.
I remember several years ago, actually back in 2005, I was working for a local hospital as an inventory control coordinator, and they decided it was time to upgrade the system. And they didn't involve any of the frontline people. They just said, here's an hour training. Here's a new system. It's live on Monday. Now our productivity took a hit, not for a day, not for a week, but for several months, because everything was completely changed. And I think they could have lessened the blow if they would have involved us more in the training and more in deciding what software they had. But, we're just people out at the warehouse. And you got to stop and think about that. Like you said, Art, I love the way you said it, is the tool is not magic. It's not AI at this point anyways. It's not going to read your mind and do everything you want it to do. You have to know your process. You have to know what is your workflow, and will this software, will this tool help you, or will it hinder you on your way to your goals? And I think people are looking for that elusive perfect tool, which you've already said does not exist. And I don't think it ever will exist. But you got to figure out what tool is going to best serve you. If I want to hang a picture in my living room, well, getting a car jack is probably not going to work. I don't want to get the big mallet either. I want to get one of those small hammers and a small nail. You have to get the right tool to serve you, to get you to where you want to go.
Yes, absolutely. And to go back to deploying those types of tools, when you look at it from a business perspective or a professional perspective, there are 4 groups that I typically see involved in these types of productivity tool deployment discussions in an organization. There's the users, there's the support and training team, there's the IT team IT is part of the support. There's the support and training, then there's the management team. And I put those in that order specifically because the management team delivers the least amount of value to the overall conversation. The users deliver the most, because they're the ones who have to live with this thing every day. And they're the ones who will see the greatest productivity increase or decrease, depending on how effectively the training team and the change management group are able to do their jobs. The IT team is able to keep it up and running, and how much the management team stays out of the way of allowing the work to actually happen. So when you look at it from a solopreneur standpoint, guess who gets to wear all of those hats? So you have to start swapping hats. You have to start from the beginning and say, okay, how is this thing going to help me every day? Is it going to help me? Am I going to pick up drag from certain things? Is it going to allow me to store a lot of stuff but make it harder to find? Do I have to fall back and search all the time because it's difficult to create a structure within it that matches the way I think about it? How do I support this thing? How do I keep it running? What happens when it goes offline? When I look at cloud-based solutions, that's always a question. If you're a solopreneur, not only are you the user, you're the IT department. And if that stuff is not available to you, can you keep working? Or are you hung up now? All the way down to the management. Does this help drive my strategic goals and objectives? From a tool analysis standpoint, it's difficult, especially as a solopreneur, because you're like, do I have the kind of time to dedicate to trying this stuff and learning it and working through it? And that's why I say that it's more important to learn your platform. And when I say platform with a small p, how you are productive versus how a particular tool thinks you should be productive.
I'll give you a real live example. 4 years ago, I left the world of WordPress for a platform called Kajabi. I didn't think about, do I need it? I was studying under a coach, and this person recommended Kajabi. And I went over to Kajabi, which is not WordPress, and it took me months of lost productivity learning how to use the software. WordPress is working just fine. But because I didn't stop, I just listened to what the Pied Piper said and dove over to the software, and I lost a bunch of productivity. Now I'm having to realize there's a lot of limitations with Kajabi, and I'm actually switching back to WordPress, but I'm not doing it like overnight. I'm actually beginning the gradual process, and it'll be a smoother transition this time. But this also applies because Kajabi is an app, whether it's your calendar app, your to-do app. Think, and that's one thing that Art and I have said throughout the show today. Know your why. What is the purpose that you need this app to do? Because I was using the software, which I won't name on the show, and my coach said, "Why are you using the software?" And I was using it because someone else told me to use it. This person did not know my business, did not know my workflow. They said, you have to use the XYZ software. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I spend months learning how to use software. And then my coach, who's brilliant, said, why are you using this? I didn't have an answer because it was bright, shiny object. And so I hope we've impressed on the listener over our time together today that you got to have a reason, because every time you learn something new, even though your productivity may improve in the long run, in the short term, it's going to take a hit because you're going to have to learn how to use it.
Absolutely. The bright, shiny object syndrome is so inherent in productivity tools across the board, and it's typically identified as templates. Templates are like a soapbox issue for me because so many people look at tools that have template capabilities and they'll say, oh, I just need to find a template that'll do everything for me. And one of the big culprits that I use all the time is a tool, Notion. I like Notion. I like the way it works. I think its structure is interesting. It gives you a lot of flexibility and capability, but it is also steeped in this template realm of, oh, I can go get, this entire template that's going to run my life. No, it's not. I'll tell you that now. I mean, guaranteed, as we said earlier, they're selling you something. And I don't want to criticize templates and template builders. I think they do excellent work and they give a great opportunity for people to see structure and to have a starting place, but also recognize none of those is going to be an exact fit. You have to make it your own, because at the end of the day, whether you're a solopreneur, whether you're a company, doesn't matter. It's individuals that do the work. Teams work together, but individuals execute, and all individuals work differently. They may have some complementary aspects, but there are always little nuances. And you have to tune your system, your personal system, to work within those nuances. I know a guy, I've worked with him for a number of years, who does everything off of his phone when it comes to task management. All of his stuff goes into his phone. All of it comes off his phone. Everything's managed directly through that device. And I asked him, I said, wouldn't it be easier just to pull it up on the PC? He goes, no, because this is a habit I've created. I always know what this behavior is to be. I'm like, that's cool. That works for you. And that's effective. You're able to measure it. You're able to capture a system that I refer to all the time as CPR, capture, process, report. You're able to capture what you have to do. You're able to process it to execution, and you're able to report back to yourself on the success measures and the historical data to make decisions in the future. That works great. Stick with it. Now, it's taken him years to get to that point. And I don't recommend that for everybody, but at least he dedicated the time to do a little bit of navel gazing and introspection into how he works and to find out what's most effective for him. And I think everybody should do that. And you're right. Coaches can help. Coaches are probably one of the best ways to get an outside set of eyes on how you function rather than, oh, this is how the tool should work. It's very different than having a consultant say, okay, configure this and map this and do that now. A coach will actually say, okay, here's how you get better using this thing, whatever it is that you're using.
One of the biggest things I learned, probably, it took me a while to get here, Art, but about 2 months ago, I had Kajabi because I had the membership. I still have the membership, but I noticed something. My members never went on the website. Never. They went to the live Zoom call and we had a good conversation, and that's all they wanted. And I'm like, so I'm spending all this time building out this platform that no one said they wanted and no one used. That's just another example that we talked about today. Just because I think it'd be cool to have this doesn't mean that people are going to want it. And I can look at the numbers. You said measure. Okay. Nobody was using it. Nobody. So I wasted all this time learning how to set up a membership site, building it out, creating the graphics and all this stuff. And nobody went there. It was like dusty and the doors were creaking because no one used them. So again, we've said this, I don't know how many times on the show, you got to have a reason why you get a tool or you pay for a service or something. What is your why? And I think, like you said, it starts with most people go from management training, support IT users. Well, you got to start with the user because that's the person going to be using it all the time. And if you're a solopreneur, you are the user. So you don't have time to waste learning how to use a tool that may give you 0.00001% improvement on productivity because you're going to lose all that productivity as you learn how to use the tool. I think you and I really impressed this upon the listener today because it is very important.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough when it comes to those 4 tiers, because when you look at it from a large organization standpoint, you can be a full-time user. This is all you do is you use the tool. But if you're in a solopreneur environment, you're a quarter-time user because you're also quarter-time training, support, and management. And that's where you can get yourself into a bind. And that's often where I get into the conversation with people about the difference between something turnkey and something open system or bespoke. Well, maybe it would make more sense to build my own. That's fine. And I think that's a great approach if, and again, if, that big tool, and it's going to take something that has some substance and some power behind it, can do more than just that task listing. If it's going to do just task management for you, the odds are pretty good the big things are going to be overwhelming and unnecessary. Focus down, keep it simple, keep it refined, keep it efficient. Look for the times when you've had problems introduced, rather than, ooh, that's a new feature. I'd like to put that into place. Now, talking about the web hosting and the websites, that's one of those continuing evolution of tools. As you go through, you started with WordPress, you moved to another one, you now are looking at WordPress again. That makes perfect sense because as your skill set evolves and as your education evolves around those tools, you're establishing a much more solid platform of knowledge as to what you want out of whatever platform you go or whatever tool you utilize, which is what we talked about earlier. So when I look at things, for example, I'm a big Squarespace user. And yes, I know a lot of people, Squarespace, you know what? It does the job. It does the job. I can set the sites up. I can do the updates. I can send out the publications. I can move on. And you're right. Does it give me the measures back that I need to know? Am I spending a lot of time on places that I don't need to spend time on? That, I think, is probably the most important thing. When you look at your tool, whatever tool it is, if it's not giving you insight that you can't get other ways, it's not going to help you. It's just one more box to tick. It becomes another task, which is the last thing you want any tool to be.
100%. Last question I have for you, sir, is I have been saying since I hung my shingle out back in 2011 that complexity is the gateway to procrastination. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, that can be a tough one. I agree completely. It's an easy way to hide behind complexity because you wind up with systems that just get in the way or complicate it. I'll flip it around a little bit. I'll say that flexibility can often be the gateway to procrastination. And I'll go back to Notion as my target for this. Love it. But it's easy to sit there and spend hours building a custom dashboard here, building a custom configuration there, which is its strength, but it's also Alice's rabbit hole.
Yep.
So you have to go back to that balance and say, okay, what can I do with it? Now, I use it all the time for task management. I use Notion for that. But here's how I do it. I have a master task list in Notion that holds all my tasks for everything, personal, professional, across the board, all projects, clients, whatever. By using categorizations within there, I can now create other views of that master task list depending on need. So for every client page that I have the tasks that are categorized for that client pulled out of that master database and displayed on that page. So it gives me focus. But it takes time to set that up. And if you have time to do it, it's worth it. If you don't have time to do it, you're not going to help yourself or anybody else out. So you have to balance that complexity with execution. And that's, again, as we talked about earlier, start simple, build from there, look at where you're having issues, and even better, engage a coach to work with you to help find those issues that you may not be aware of. You know, like the old saying is, it's really tough to drain the swamp when you're up to your butt in alligators. You have to really give yourself a chance to say, okay, where can this get better? And see if it actually does help out when you make those changes.
You know, that's a spectacular place to end the show today. All right, this has been a great conversation. We gave a ton of value to the listener. And just remember, listener, this is not a one-time thing. You can listen to us over and over again if you missed anything. It's perfectly okay. So, Art, where can we go to find out more about what you're doing in the world? I know you have a couple podcasts, you have a website, so tell us more about that.
I am on the podcast called ProductivityCast with a couple other guys. We do a weekly podcast. We talk about all kinds of productivity topics. I also have another show I do called CrossPlatform, where we talk about the world of doing productivity regardless of the tools that you have in place. I do it with an Apple guy, and I'm an Android guy, so sometimes we get into a little green-blue conversation there, but that's okay. And then I also have my own Being Productive podcast. And you can always find me over at GelwicksTech.com for anything I've written or anything else I have going on.
Excellent. Well, Art, I want to thank you for being here and sharing your wealth of information with my audience. I learned something, and I know my audience did as well. So thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate you having me on. This was great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mr. Productivity Podcast with Art Gelwicks. And I want to ask you a favor. I want to ask you to do me and Art a favor. If you listened this far into the episode, all the way to the end, congratulations. But you probably got a ton of value. So don't keep it a secret. Smash that share icon on whatever productivity app you're listening to this episode on, and share it with 2 or 3 of your friends. Share this information with them. Art and I would be so appreciative. And don't forget to find out everything you want to know about me, including to sign up for the free 21-day productivity challenge. Head on over to my website, MrProductivity.com, MISTER, MrProductivity.com. I'll be back real soon with a brand new episode. Until then, my friend, stay productive and stay positive.